You know these stories. A boy discovers he's the only one who can destroy the Dark Lord, or a group of misfits scrapes together against impossible odds. I'm sure you've read them, at least some version of it. Now, many writers use these tropes without knowing their names or purpose, but you don't have to be one of them. By the end of this video, you'll know the 15 most important ones and never read or write a fantasy story the same way again. Let's start with the character at the center of so many beloved fantasy stories. The one the universe chose. The chosen one is exactly what it sounds like. Not the hero who trained the hardest or who was the first on the scene. The hero fate selected, usually before they had any say in the matter. A birthmark, a prophecy, a scar they got as an infant. Something outside their control marks them as the one. The idea is ancient. The Epic of Gilgamesh has it. Excalibur has it. Harry Potter gets a scar the night Voldemort tries and fails to kill him. That scar is the sign. The proof stamped on him before he could walk. Neo is told by an oracle, then by everything the Matrix throws at him. The pattern is the same across thousands of years and hundreds of versions. The story picks this person, so the stakes are already built in. You don't have to convince the reader this protagonist matters. The universe already announced it. Every obstacle they face has weight from the first page. And with that said, the threat they are walking toward tends to have an equally clean profile. Picture Sauron. Not a villain with complicated motivations or a tragic backstory the camera keeps checking in on. Just an eye and a shadow lengthening over the map. The Dark Lord is one concentrated source of all the world's danger, and stopping them is the point of the story. Tolkien crystallized it. Sauron's power is real and infectious, but you never sit across a table from him having a drink. He barely appears. He is the threat, rather than a character who has a threat. Voldemort is a little more fleshed out. He has dialogue, a history, but in his function he is the same thing. One center of evil that organizes everything. What the Dark Lord does for a story is give it a single gravitational pull. Every faction and every journey lines up against that same thing. The danger is legible from page 1, and that clarity frees the rest of the story to go deep. Now, of course, somebody has to explain all of that to the hero. And the wise mentor has a resume that goes back at least as far as Merlin, and psychologist Carl Jung identified it as a deep human archetype. Gandalf, Dumbledore, Obi-Wan. What they share isn't just age or magical ability. It's a combination of knowing more than they are telling and choosing the hero specifically. The mentor isn't teaching everyone. They found you. That selectivity is part of the magic. They hand the reader exposition and wisdom through a voice the story has already made trustworthy, which is doing a lot of invisible work. And then almost always the mentor leaves. Usually dies, sometimes just vanishes. And the story forces the hero to stand on their own. That exit is as structural as the entrance. The mentor's death isn't a tragedy the writer throws in for shock. It's the moment the training wheels come off, because they have to come off eventually. Here's the thing though, not every hero runs towards that call. Bilbo Baggins does not want to go anywhere. Frodo would genuinely prefer to stay in the Shire. The reluctant hero is the protagonist who gets dragged into the story against their will, who says no, argues no, maybe runs away a little bit before eventually, almost against their own better judgment, saying yes. The arc is the journey from refusal to commitment. The reluctant hero ends as a genuine hero. They found what they had to find. The reluctance was the starting point, not the defining quality. And that reluctance is the most relatably human setup in fiction, because the extraordinary adventure arriving uninvited at your door is terrifying, not exciting, and the reader knows that. The eventual yes of the character feels earned precisely because you watch them not want it to begin with. The anti-hero, by contrast, never quite makes that turn. Geralt of Rivia is morally grey. He knows it and he doesn't apologize for it. Jaime Lannister introduces himself by pushing a child out a window. The anti-hero is your protagonist without the usual package of just heroic virtues. The term itself is old. People were using it as early as 1714, and Shakespeare was building these figures long before anyone named them. Hamlet paralyzed by his own overthinking. Macbeth choosing ambition over conscience. What the anti-hero produces is a sustained uncertainty. That unpredictability is what makes them compelling. You keep watching because you genuinely don't know what they'll do next. Now, when it comes to the people around both types of hero though, They often end up forming something bigger than just a team. A found family is the crew that becomes the emotional core of the story, usually because everyone's actual family is gone, absent, or not an option. Look at the crew of the Serenity in Firefly. A disgraced soldier, a mercenary, a preacher, a fugitive doctor, his traumatized sister. People who had nowhere else to land, who are held together by nothing except the fact that Mal doesn't leave people behind. That bond built under pressure with no obligation at all is what makes the audience desperate for their survival. Found family gives a story its warmth. It puts something real at the center of the violence and the stakes. Not just stop the bad thing from happening, but keep these people who I love from being destroyed. The reader invests in those relationships, and that investment is what makes the dangerous parts of the plot actually dangerous. But let's shift the camera out now, away from the characters and into the world they live in. Two versions of that world keep showing up in fantasy. The first one is right here with us, a trope literally known as the hidden world. Here magic is real, but there are rules about hiding it. Harry Potter's wizarding world sits inside ours. The Statue of Secrecy, Diagon Alley behind a brick wall in London. Urban fantasy also gives us vampires holding down jobs, werewolves living in apartment buildings, the Fae running nightclubs, and none of it is visible to someone who doesn't already know to look. The pull of that setup is the proximity. Wonder isn't somewhere else, it's adjacent. There's a door you've never noticed, and behind it, everything is different. That feeling of, what if this has always been right here, is what the hidden magical world runs on. Portal fantasy then takes a different path. Instead of magic hiding in our world sends you somewhere else entirely, through a wardrobe, a rabbit hole, or a looking glass. And the person who steps through is ordinary, someone like you and me who has never seen any of this before and needs everything explained. That newcomer is doing something extremely useful. Farah Mendelssohn, in her study of fantasy architecture, identified portal quests as one of the genre's fundamental modes, and the key is that the portal arrival naturally generates explanation. Narnia and Wonderland both know exactly what they're doing when they send an ordinary child through. They've brought themselves a built-in lens. The Wizard of Oz uses it too. Dorothy doesn't need to be told that Munchkinland is strange because everything about her reaction tells the audience what to feel. The outsider eye is a quiet narrative gift because the world gets to be seen fresh every single time. And everything so far, the people, the places, runs on an underlying structure. Joseph Campbell mapped it in 1949 in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and he called it the monomyth, a pattern he found across myth and folklore and literature worldwide, where a hero leaves the ordinary world, faces a series of trials in a special world, and returns transformed. It starts with a call to adventure. The quiet life gets interrupted by a letter arriving or a stranger appearing, the village burning or the oracle speaking. That moment is where the story engine turns over. Christopher Vogler later compressed Campbell's framework into a 12-stage structure for screenwriters, and the result is one of the most widely used plotting maps in professional storytelling. Star Wars is the textbook version. You have the farm, the mentor, the call, the refusal, the crossing over. Once you know about it, you see it everywhere. And it's worth knowing that if you're trying to lock the shape of your own story before you start drafting, the call to adventure is often your inciting incident. The exact beat my free fantasy story compass asks you to define so everything else has a reference point in your story. Links in the description below if you want it. Before that call happens though, sometimes the world has already made arrangements. And that's where the prophecy comes in. The prophecy is a foretelling that bends everything toward a fixed outcome. And in the sharpest versions, it causes the very thing it tries to prevent. Oedipus is the original model. His father hears a prophecy that his son will kill him, and the steps he takes to prevent that fate are the exact steps that make it happen. Macbeth has witches who tell him what's coming, and his response to what they say sets it in motion. That's the structural logic underneath the best prophecies. Knowing the future isn't protection, it's a trap. In fantasy, prophecy often does two things. It builds dread by letting you see the shape of what's coming, you just don't know how, and it builds a kind of destiny over the plot that makes every choice feel heavier because the reader is watching characters try to navigate something that may already be decided. And from here then, we need to look at the thing everyone is actually chasing. The term MacGuffin was coined by screenwriter Angus MacPhail and made famous by Alfred Hitchcock, who defined it as whatever the spies are fighting over. The papers or the stolen microfilm. But the audience doesn't really care what it actually is. Hitchcock looked at it from a lens that said, the emptier the better, because the MacGuffin's only job is to set everything in motion. George Lucas had a different instinct here. R2-D2 matters. The Ark of the Covenant matters. Fantasy tends to land closer to Lucas here. The One Ring isn't just a device for organizing the quest, for example. It has weight and a pull of its own. It corrupts. It matters as an object. The quest object gives a fantasy story one thing that everyone's goal points toward. It draws the map, it creates conflict at every junction, and it makes the final location inevitable. One object that organizes everything. That organizing principle doesn't only come in the form of objects though. Sometimes it comes in the form of a person who was there the whole time. I mean, everyone knows Aragorn. One of my favorite characters of all time, especially Viggo Mortensen's representation in the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy. You meet him as Strider, a rough-edged ranger in a tavern, someone with no apparent connection to thrones or legacy. He's been introduced as ordinary on purpose because his actual heritage, rightful king of Gondor, was dangerous to advertise. The hidden heir trope is about a character whose real identity is being concealed, usually by circumstance, sometimes by protective design, and often because the forces that would kill them for that blood are still active. Jon Snow is another version of it. Raised as a bastard, treated as lesser, his true parentage kept from him and from the audience for most of the story's length. What this structure gives you is a slow reveal with escalating weight. Each new piece of evidence that the ordinary person is extraordinary lands harder than the last, because you watch them earn your trust as just a person first. The underdog and the destined figure sit in the same character at once here, and that combination is very hard to resist. You get the relatability of someone with nothing, and the satisfaction of watching that same person discover they were always something. And the story gets to ask what that heritage actually means once it's no longer hidden. Which brings us to the last cluster of tropes, and that's all about magic. The Magic Academy concept, for example, is older than most people realize. Hogwarts is a reference everyone uses, but the fully developed model, a school, an island, a structured institution where you go to learn magic, that's Ursula K. Le Guin's A Wizard of Earthsea from 1968, set at the School of Rogue. Le Guin herself credited a single throwaway line from T.H. White as a seed, but she built the thing herself. Hogwarts made it famous worldwide, no question, but it arrived as a place Le Guin had already built 30 years earlier. The reason this trope keeps getting used is what a school structure does for a story. It hands you rivals, mentors, escalating lessons, a built-in hierarchy, tests, and social stakes all at once. It's a natural home for coming-of-age stories because school is already where we expect young people to be shaped into what they are going to be. Elemental magic as a trope then has a different origin entirely. It's not a narrative invention, it's a philosophical one. The Greek philosopher Empedocles proposed that everything in existence is made of 4 roots: earth, water, air, and fire. He wasn't writing fantasy here, he was writing about physics. But the framework turned out to be incredibly durable for storytelling because those 4 elements come preloaded with intuitive opposition. Fire and water fight. Earth and air are different axes of power. Avatar: The Last Airbender is the cleanest modern version. The 4 nations map to the 4 elements, and the entire geopolitical conflict is built into the elemental structure before a single character makes a choice. Every reader already has instincts about what fire does and what water does, which is precisely the point. An elemental magic system doesn't need to teach you the basics, it only needs to extend what you already feel is true. You can run a whole political map of the question of which element a culture bends, because the reader arrives with half the emotional logic pre-installed. Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive does something adjacent. The searchers feel elemental even when they don't map one-to-one on classical elements, because the underlying principle is the same. Powers that feel like forces of nature rather than arbitrary rules. That intuitive resonance is the whole reason the framework keeps getting reinvented. Now, I cannot end a video about fantasy tropes without talking about weapons that have names, of course. A legendary weapon is an object that's been around long enough and done enough that it has become more than a tool. It has become something you claim. Arthur doesn't just own a sword, he has a magical weapon, one given by the Lady of the Lake, and the scabbard alone was set to protect him from wounds. That sword is part of what makes him king. The weapon declares something about the person holding it, and that declaration is the whole structural point here. It turns the hero's worthiness into something you can hold, something the reader can see being passed down or broken. When the right person picks it up, the world agrees, and the hero's internal claim becomes external and visible, something you can point at. Thor's hammer Mjolnir is another example of this. The One Ring, on the other hand, is the inverted version of that logic. Instead of wielding a legendary object, Frodo's entire task is to destroy one. The weapon that wants to destroy him rather than serve him. But the shape underneath this is identical. A legendary object that has accumulated meaning over centuries, that everyone in the world understands is not simply a thing, and that becomes the physical focus of the story's entire final movement. All the weight it's been carrying the whole time lands at once in a specific place with a specific person holding it. That's what the legendary weapon or item is for. The climax has a physical center, and the hero's worthiness or unworthiness is no longer a matter of opinion. But when you actually send your hero on the way, there is a risk that you will kill your story on that journey. So watch this video here next to ensure that your travel sequences actually make sense.